Right, okay, so the first CA is going to be a quiz next Monday. Right, this is the time, 4:30 to 4:45 to 5:15. Right, it will be conducted across 2 LT. So your setting arrangement is based on these two, based on your surname. Right, okay, the format is 30 multiple choice question. Okay, settle down please. Right, the topic covered by first lecture is all his first 3 weeks of content. For my part is slide 1 to 100, okay, for the student version. Right, instruction, attendance is compulsory, be punctual, bring along your photo ID. Right, bring along a calculator and a pencil because you'll be filling up the optical form for marking. Okay, this again I've shown you before, just for the benefit of those who may not come yesterday on Monday. So this is the cover page. Right, you'll be given 30 minutes to answer those questions. Right, okay, the important thing is that for this particular question booklet, you need to write down your name as well as your matriculation number. And then this thing you have to return at the end of the quiz. Right, this is how the optical form will look like. Okay, make sure you write down your course code. Instead of course title, write down your name. So in the event, somehow, if you circle your matriculation number incorrectly, we can still trace it who the person is. Right, okay, the date of the quiz, of course, this is 2 days ago, this is a sample. Hey, settle down, please. Right, okay, matriculation number, make sure you circle correctly, because if you make a mistake, it's going to be difficult to trace already. Right, okay, and there's 30 questions. So just circle up correctly. Ideally, use a 2B pencil. Right, okay, in the past we have students who use a pen, blue point, this ballpoint pen. They circle it here, and then when they want to make a correction, they just simply cross it out and then circle another thing. Right, you know what happened to the story, so I didn't have to tell you what happened. So use bring along the pencil, bring along an eraser. So if you want to make correction, make sure you erase it properly. Right, okay, so for today's, we'll be looking at a few things like, for example, giving you some tips about how to buy a camera, okay, and some very basic photograph, tips for taking photos. I think some of you are probably more expert than me, so it's just, of course, just some basic tips. Right, okay, so digital camera. Right, when do you know you need to buy a digital camera? Let me just try out the audio to see it's okay.
This is a shot of us on the airplane to Mexico. This is one of us arriving in Mexico. Oh, this is a shot of me wearing one of those big Mexican hats. Oh, this is a good one.
Need a camera? Visit Simon's Cameras. Check out the new Canon PowerShot A700 with 6x optical zoom. Available at Simon's Cameras, 11 St. Antoine Street West.
Okay, so if you do that, you know you need a digital camera. Right, okay, so pretty much in terms of camera, there are 2 broad categories. One is a very simple, compact point and shoot camera. So as the name suggests, it's simply you just point at something and you take a photo. It's for most people, that you are not a professional. Okay, as opposed to the compact, the very simple kind of camera, you have the professional camera. So among the professional camera, the most popular one is the digital single lens reflex camera. right? Typically, it's just simply called the DSLR camera. Okay, so there's these two broad categories of camera. So some of the factors you should consider when you try to buy a camera, of course, there's a few. For different person, you may have different consideration, but pretty much these are some common factor you should take into consideration. One is price point, right? How much are you willing to spend to buy the camera? Okay, the simplicity, whether you just simply want to use it to take a picture, right? That's it. You don't really want to know this aperture setting, shutter speed, or anything. If that's the case, probably you should go for a simple point and shoot compact camera. Okay, convenience, right? So for some people, convenience is actually very important, because if you want to take a professional DSLR camera, it's very bulky, right? Just imagine, I'm not sure any of you have actually gone overseas, in one of the winter countries, cold countries to take photo. If you have done that before, you'll know that it's actually very cumbersome, because when you wear the glove, when it's winter, you have to wear the glove. And sometimes the glove can be very thick. And then your finger become not very nimble. When you try to press, every time you have to remove the cap of the DSLR, and then you have to take a picture, and then you have to cap it back. It's actually very, very cumbersome. I tried before. Now, the first year when I go to a country during my holiday, winter holiday, to take picture, I used a professional camera. But thereafter, I thought, no, what the heck, too cumbersome already. Just use a simple camera. The picture is almost as good as a professional one. Of course, it cannot be compared with the professional one, but it's probably sufficient for most cases. So therefore, convenience is one important consideration when you buy a camera. Okay, the others is performance. Nowadays, either you're talking about compact or professional camera, most of them can offer you pretty good quality. Of course, being the professional, it still can render you more control and hence render better quality. Okay, size. Size is another important factor. As I mentioned before, professional tends to be very bulky, right? Whereas for the compact one, it's very simple. You can just slip it into your pocket, right? So these are various factors when you should consider when you try to buy a camera. Right, so earlier on I mentioned a little bit about this first category of the camera, also known as a compact camera. So compact is small, it's easy to use. So surprisingly, nowadays, even for the very compact camera, it's packed with lots of capability and functionality. Okay, so including things like autofocus, auto exposure, and so on. So the advantages and disadvantages, I think even without going through this slide, you should know. Right, the advantages is that usually for compact camera, it's cheaper, right? It's easier to use, right? It's more compact. Okay, it's also very convenient to carry around. Okay, the disadvantages is that you have less control. Therefore, the quality of the pictures that you capture usually tends to be a bit less, okay, compared to the professional camera. So for the professional camera, right, one of the very popular type is the digital single lens reflex camera, also known as DSLR. I'm not sure if any one of you have played with it. Usually, sometimes it's for you to show off to your girlfriend, so you need to bring along a big, bulky camera. Okay, but pretty much, as the name suggests, professional camera. So professional means that you have more control, you have more flexibility, to adjust or to capture the imaging scene that you want. Right, so there's a lot more creative control that you can use for example, adjust for different exposure, different focus, different color schemes, and so on. So the advantages, of course, is quite clear. It's a higher quality, right? You can produce higher quality image because you can have a lot more control, right? For example, zooming, exposure, shutter speed control, and so on. Right, the disadvantages, I think, is quite clear. Right, if you think about it, is DSLR camera usually is more expensive. Okay, it's also harder to use because there's so many different control operations. So just to familiarize yourself with it, it's going to take you a while. Okay, the size is much bigger, and there's also a higher chance that the camera may break down. So I know this is a very broad kind of categorization, but for the purpose of this particular course, we just want to give you a quick high-level overview. Right, if you're interested, you can always go to, for example, YouTube to find many professional camera review and buying guides. Right, so this is how a typical DSLR camera looks like. Okay, you can see there's all kinds of control buttons. This is just the outside, some of the common control. You have the zooming ring for you to zoom in manually. Right, you're focusing to focus on a particular scene. Right, shutter button for you to capture the image. right? This mega optical image stabilizer, the one that we mentioned before, right, to prevent blur image due to your hand jittering or hand shaking. Right, okay, you have a single mode or multi-burst mode to capture either one image or multiple images, right? Okay, the power button, the dial mode, right? So this dial mode, if you can see, this M, S, A, and P here. So these are the different settings before that I mentioned, whether it's manual, shutter priority, aperture priority, and the program mode, okay? Right, this is the hot shoe for you to put in the flash, right, the microphone, right, and so on and so forth. Okay, so this is the general overview of some of the common settings of a professional camera. Right, I'm not sure any one of you has heard of this camera called Lytro. Any one of you has heard of it? Lytro? None of you? Right, actually this Lytro has been, I think, the first time it was introduced is about 2 years ago. Right, and then if I remember correctly, last year I think it appeared in Challenger. Yeah, if you go to Challenger, I think you can buy this camera. Right, so the idea of this Lytro is very interesting. You can see the description is shoot first, focus later. Shoot first, focus later. I mean, this is quite different from traditionally when we take an image. Traditionally, when you want to take an image, you always have to focus first before you take the image, right? So for Lytro camera, actually it's opposite. You can take image, right? You don't have to worry about the focus, right? You should be able to capture the image later. So that's why it's very interesting. It's called shoot first, right? You can focus the image later. So I'm going to play you a short video. Right? Hopefully they'll give you some idea about how this particular camera works.
Shoot first and focus later. That's the vision of Silicon Valley-based startup Lytro.
I bought my first digital camera, and I'd taken thousands of pictures with it, and really had challenges, I think as many people do, to capturing the right fleeting moment with the right focus.
So Ren Ng, the company's founder, set out to reimagine the camera, developing a new way to take and see pictures. Now users can shoot a blurry image and refocus it on the spot.
We call it Camera 3.0, where it's about recording an entirely new kind of data called the light field.
The light field is the amount of light traveling in every direction through every point in space. Traditional cameras can only record a single plane of light, but Ng's camera can capture the whole light field through a unique sensor.
So this is the main innovation.
Kira Wampler is the VP of Product Management at Lytro.
This is the array of very small cameras that allows us to capture the direction of light when it's flowing into the lens. So the light field sensor is what captures these mega rays, or these millions of rays of light, and then it's the light field engine at the back of the camera that processes all of that data.
It's this data that allows you to focus the pictures after you've taken your shot. Ng was first exposed to the light field technology while a computer science student at Stanford. At that time, his professors needed a room full of cameras tethered to a giant supercomputer to test their theories. Ng then took the technology one step further, bottling it into the Lytro camera. In addition to focusing images in the camera and on a desktop, users can also take an image and share it on the web for others to manipulate and refocus.
We have a player that wraps around each picture when it is shared on the web. So I just opened up this picture. I'm in Facebook. And I can zoom in, I can focus on the flowers, I can pan and focus on the butterfly.
For Lytro, they're just getting started on their mission to revolutionize the camera. The $38 billion camera market is a big one, and there's a lot of opportunity for innovation. One idea? He's working on making his photo images more three-dimensional.
That sensation that we have as human beings moving through the world, where as we move, objects at different depths move at different rates, which gives us this 3D sense in the world. All of these kinds of 3D cues come from every shot of the light field camera and Lytro's first product.
So while Ng may have just finished developing Camera 3.0, Camera 4.0 may be only a click away. For Smart Planet, I'm Sumi Das.
All right. So anyway, Valentine is 2 days away. So now I guess this pointer, no, the girlfriend can nudge on your boyfriend. No, Challenger, I cannot remember how much that's selling. I think it's about 400 something, right? Okay, but for those of you, if you are interested, no, you can actually go to the internet, go to Google, type in this Lytro, right? There's a web page, there's some sample images that has been captured using this camera. You can actually try it out to see how you can zoom onto different regions of the images. It actually does work, okay? Right, so the next things that I'm going to touch on very briefly is just to provide some quick overviews of some of the tips, right? As I mentioned, some of you are really probably professional photographer. So here I'm just trying to give you some very basic tips, right? Okay, so some of the things we're going to look at are, for example, rule of the thirds, which is a pretty well-known rules. Okay, diagonal rules and some miscellaneous tips when you're trying to capture images. Right, okay, so what's rule of the thirds? So when you try to frame a particular imaging scene and try to capture an image, right, this, for many people, is agree that this is usually what you should do is that you can kind of imagine that this particular image you're trying to capture here is divided by 2 horizontal lines and 2 vertical lines evenly. And then when you're trying to capture an image, you should try to position the object of interest along either these 2 vertical lines, these 2 horizontal lines, and this intersection here. So object of interest, usually try to position along the intersection or these lines here. Right, so this pretty much is the essence of the rules of third. Right, so this is one example image that is captured based on this particular rules here. So you can see that for this particular kind of a horizon here, right, you position it which is more or less aligned with this particular line here. Right, okay, and then this object probably of interest is somewhere, you know, close to this particular intersection here. Right, it turned out that if you position or you frame your object along this, based on this rule, it will turn out to be more interesting and dynamic, right, as opposed to if you just put everything near the center. Right, probably near the center for mathematicians, probably they like it because they like symmetry. But for most people, usually, if you follow this rule, it will turn out to be more interesting, the image. Right, okay, so that's one. Another one is a diagonal rule. Right, I guess people just don't like, when it comes to image, probably they don't like symmetry so much. Mathematics, they like symmetry. But photography, they want to have some artistic value, so they want it to be a little bit off-center. Right, so in this case here, right, this is called diagonal rules. So diagonal rules means that when you try to capture an image, right, it's good if you try to position the object of interest along the diagonal here. Right, for example, like this, or this shoreline, which is along this diagonal here, will look more dynamic and more interesting. Right. Right, so apart from that, there's also some very basic kind of photography tips that you may want to consider. So the first thing is, of course, think about what you want to capture. Right, think about the object, right, or the imaging scene you want to capture, and then how you want to portray. So that's number one. And number two, you can consider to take very close-up picture, especially if you're a baby or puppy. You notice that we go to YouTube or Flickr, they always like to take very close-up image of a puppy or a dog. Right, so that's number two. You try to get close-up shots of some imaging scenes. Right. Okay. Number three is try to make sure that your subject is as natural as possible. Right, so it will not look like a little bit awkward, that kind of thing. Right. Number three. Number four, lighting is important, right? Because you want to make sure that your images that you capture have sufficient exposure, right? So it will not be too dark or too bright, right? So adequate, proper exposure is important, right? Number four, at times you may want to provide some foreground, right, to make it look a little bit more interesting, right? So for example, sometimes you may want to have a little bit of foreground to make it more interesting, right? But you should also be careful about the background, right? For example, when you take an image, right, be aware or be conscious of this background clutter, because the background clutter may distract the foreground object of interest from the background clutter. Okay? So this may be a slightly better background as opposed to this. Right, so sometimes you may want to take image off the center, right? Because I say, when you take image a little bit asymmetric, sometimes give a little bit of flavors or artistics. Right, okay, make sure when you capture an image, keep your hands steady, right? If you shake too much, then it's going to become blur, especially if you're taking images which are very nearby, very far away, or those images is captured with a slow shutter speed, you need to make sure your hand is steady, right? Okay, shoot from different angle, right? Create different effect, right? Don't every time be very monotonous, right? Always shoot from the front, in the center, and so on. So you can shoot from different angle, right? But most importantly, is probably trying to be creative. Yeah. So when you want to capture an image, make sure it's creative. Right. So these are some of the images that are not so well done. You can see, for example, this image. What's the problem? I think it's quite clear. The example I choose here are very obvious. This one, what's the problem with this image? It's wrong focus. Huh? So this one is wrong focus. How about this one? Probably a bit too much background clutter. Huh? Okay. How about this one? Yeah, nothing. It's very monotonous, right? And also, you can see this horizon is more or less in the center. So somehow it just doesn't feel so good. This one? I think it's quite clear. Huh? Not enough exposure or lighting. Right, okay. So, as I mentioned, these are just some very basic common sense tips, for you to help to take some image. But if you're interested, there are many photograph, this guide and that tell you how to take a picture properly. Right, okay. Actually, I also have a video that provide more tips, so you can view it. There are more tips from the video from what I say. Huh? Okay, so often, after you have captured the image using a camera, right, sometimes you try your best to capture the image, but after you capture the image, they probably still require some editing, right? So this is where the step come into place. It's like the post-processing. You may want to edit part of the image. Right, so for this part here, there's a few very basic kind of things because I don't want to go into in-depth. Each of the things by itself can be a course, right? So we only cover the very high-level overview, right? So we look at what's the purpose of performing image editing, what are the software that you can use to perform editing, and also I'll introduce to you one of the mobile app applications that I thought is quite interesting for image collection. Right, so image editing, the whole purpose of image editing is you want to do some post-processing to improve the quality of the images for various reasons. So there's many common operations such as resizing the image. You probably only want to crop up certain region of interest. You want to increase the contrast of the image. Okay, and sharpening, sometimes you may want to make an image look sharper. Sometimes you may want to blur out certain things because, for example, you have a pimple or some blemish. You may want to blur it out. That means soften the image. Okay, in painting, right, if you are with your girlfriend, last year's girlfriend, you may want to remove it. So in painting, right, various software tools. Right, okay, some of them are, actually, these are just a very basic thing, like image resizing, as the name suggests. Right, it just change the resolution, either make it larger or smaller. Right, okay, cropping. Right, so for cropping, pretty much as the name suggests, many of you have done cropping before. It's just to crop up certain region of interest from the image. Sometimes you may want to do that because you may want to improve the composition of the image, because you find that, right, some of the other areas may not be so interesting. So for example, this particular photos here, if you just look at this photo in total, it's actually not so interesting because you have some background clutter which kind of distract, okay, the main focus here, the star here. So you can easily improve the composition of the image by performing a cropping, right? So this looks much better than this. Okay, changing the image contrast. Sometimes you know that for an image, you will be using a range of pixels to display the image. So if the range of pixels that is used to display the image is very narrow, then the contrast is not very good. So you can see, for example, this particular image here, the contrast is not very good. So one of the reasons why contrast is not very good, because the range of the tone, okay, the range of the pixel value or the tone that is being shown, that is being used is very small. So one common thing for you to improve the image contrast is to increase the range of the tone that will be being shown. So that's called contrast enhancement. So if you enhance the contrast, the picture will look a lot better. Right? Sometimes you may want to do some Photoshop, that kind of thing, to change object of interest to different color. Right? Sometimes if the image that you capture is a little bit blurred, okay, it could be because your hand just happened to shake a little bit, or your camera is slightly out of focus, then you can do some post-processing to sharpen it, right? Okay, so you can use a post-processing such as this filter to improve the sharpness of the image. Okay. Others could be, for example, usually for ladies, if you notice that there's a little bit of blemish or for example, freckles and so on, right? If you can see here, on the face, there's a minor kind of freckles, right? You can use, in terms of image processing, is that you are applying a filter like this, something that's similar to averaging filter, to filter up some of the small noise or blemish. So you can see after the image is softened, this particular process of applying a softening filter, right, will remove some of the freckles. Right? Okay, maybe this particular thing it's not so obvious, but the effect is that you can see the skin now is a lot smoother, and yeah, you soften up the tone. Right, some of these actually operations you can read, if you have tried Instagram before, you can apply many of these filter or effect to make it look better. Right, okay, in painting means that sometimes you may want to remove certain objects of undesirable object from the image. For example, in this case, you can remove this, okay, to give rise to the final image. Right, okay, so there's also various kind of imaging software that you can use, right, to achieve all those tasks. Probably among the most popular image editing software that you have is Photoshop. Right, okay, and then but apart from Photoshop, there's actually quite a number of the software that you can use as well, right? So these are the software that you can use to edit an image, right? Trying to learn how to use Photoshop itself to edit an image in itself can be a cost, right? So yeah, because there's many things that can be done. So anyway, here I just show you, right, some of the images that was created by using Photoshop to do some touch-up. Right, you can notice that something is not quite right. I think the first one is very obvious. Huh? First one, what's wrong with the first image after Photoshop? Anyone eager eye can spot it quickly? You see? This light, huh? This part somehow is missing already. Okay, second one, actually there's also some Photoshop touch-up. What's wrong with the second image? Can anyone see it? What's wrong with the second image? Can anyone spot it? What's wrong with the second image? Copy and paste of what? Of some faces, huh? Which face? Which one? The guy or girl? Both, huh? All right, actually I'm not so good. I only managed to, okay, I spot, yeah, this guy here, right? You can see this guy and this guy here. Right, okay, this girl and this girl. Right, okay, so sometimes we are trying to, make up, for example, many of your friends attend your event, Just be a bit careful. Don't just simply cut and paste. Right, okay, how about this third image here? What's wrong with it? Can anyone spot what's wrong with the third image after you have done some Photoshop? Okay, I get a feeling some of you have spotted it already. What's wrong with that? The direction of the car. Huh? So you can see one of the lane here. Right, these three cars here. The direction is different from all the rest. Right. So just make sure that when you do some Photoshop, do it a bit more careful. Pay some attention to it. And currently, actually, there's also many ways that we can detect. When you do some of this Photoshop, there's various ways. For example, if you use a watermarking, you can actually detect which part of the image has been modified. Okay, so it's also possible to detect it. Right, so these are the, I think, right, the area, this what missing here, some duplicate images, faces here, car in wrong direction. Right, okay, so often after you have captured these images, if you just store it by yourself, it's not interesting. The reason why currently this many, for example, the popularity of digital camera, as well as the imaging capability of the mobile phone, why it becomes so popular is because you can share these images with many persons. And very often it's an instant kind of sharing with the others. So because of that, there's actually many different kind of sharing portals and services. And some of them is making really big. For example, how many of you have used Instagram before? Instagram? Wow, so few. I thought your younger generation should use it more than me, right? Right, so Instagram, right, it's actually an image or photo sharing kind of services. Okay, others including Flickr. Flickr is a little bit more serious, right? So you can provide some description, some tag, some keyword onto the image, and then you can share with the others. And it also supports searching. Right, okay, Picasa is another this image or photo sharing portals. Paranomials, okay, paranomials, usually the image that you capture often also are embedded with some GPS information, okay, right, and many others. So here I just show you some of the more popular one. Instagram, most of you, even if you have not used it, at least you should have heard of it, right? Okay, Flickr, right, Flickr. Right. If you have not really even heard of it, it may be a good idea, to go back, play with it. When you go home tonight, go to Google first, type in the Lytro thing. Earlier, the video that I showed you, you can really play with some of the images that has been captured using the Lytro camera. It's really quite interesting, right? And then you can also try to find a little bit more about some of these photo sharing portals. Okay, Picasa, another one. Right. Okay. Here, actually, if you go to Wikipedia, right, if you type in this photo sharing portal, you can probably get a list of this currently relatively popular photo sharing portal. Right. Some of them has its own features, advantages, and disadvantages, and so on. Right. If that interests you, you can also go back and have a look. Right. Okay. So early on, I mentioned that often, I'm not sure whether that has happened to you before. Often, when we go, for example, overseas for a trip, you capture a lot of images, yeah. But what do you do with the photos? You probably just leave it in your memory card, or in the past, what you do, in the past when you are still using the film base, what you do is that you take those films, you go to the shop, and then they'll develop the photos, right? And then you're going to get a stack of the photos. So what do? Probably within the first month, when your friend comes, you just show them the photo, they just flip through it. But thereafter, it just stick there. Right, so this particular things I'm trying to show you is actually a mobile app. Have any one of you used it before? This mobile app, I think I'm not sure whether it has it on the this iOS platform. I'm not sure whether this iPhone has supported, but for Android, actually there's this app here, Million Moments. Right, any one of you have used this before? None of you? Well, I'm actually a little bit surprised. Actually, personally, I feel this particular app is quite interesting because it provides some services for you to manage your photo readily. Like what I've told you before, in the past, when you go for an overseas trip, when you come back, right, you print out all those photos, and sometimes for people who are more hardworking, what they will do is that they will buy one very big album, right? Right, and then they'll try to sort out those photos and see which one and which is good, and then they'll try to paste it, right, at different location, and then probably zoom in. Some of them more hardworking, they may even, cut out, so do the manual cropping, cut out the irrelevant one, and then stick it here and there, and then write some comment here, Amsterdam, Paris, and so on and so forth, right? So, but that actually requires a lot of works, lots of your time and effort to do that. So this particular app, actually, what it will do is that it will help you to actually do some photo or image management, right? Some of the images, you can even zoom in, so-called the area of interest, to make the image a lot more interesting. Okay, so again, for those of you who are interested, you can go to the Android to download this app and then give it a try. Right, I can also play you a short video to let you get a feel, but I think if you try it, you'll see this is actually quite a good app. Yeah, so with this particular app, actually, you just need to capture all image or organize for you. It'll look a lot more interesting in the form of an album. Right. Okay, so the next topic we are going to look at is called JPEG. Right. JPEG actually stands for Joint Photographic Expert Group. All right. So in previous lecture, you have heard about this. You can either understand this particular JPEG as an image compression standard, or you can also understand this is one of the image format you store the image. Right, so for the next few slides, all right, this part of the course is that we are going to spend a bit of time talking about JPEG. It's probably the slightly more technical part, all right? So bear with me, I'm just trying to give you some high-level overview. Actually, JPEG image compression standard can be a lot more advanced than this, but I'm trying to give you a quick overview, so that at least you will know what JPEG is and roughly how it works. Right, okay, so first, why is it possible to perform image compression? We know that, right, JPEG is an image compression standard. But first, what's the motivation? Why do we want to perform image compression? First, why do we want to perform image compression? Okay, faster transfer rate, but why is it faster transfer rate? Yeah, because the file size is much smaller. Huh? So the main reason why you want to perform this image compression is that if you do not compress it, an image by itself actually requires a large storage requirement. Okay, a large storage requirement. Okay, it can be easily a few megabytes if you don't compress it. Right, but once you use, for example, a compression technique such as JPEG to compress it, you can easily reduce, for example, 1 megabyte of images to about 50 to 100 kilobytes. So it's a significant compression. Once you have compressed it, you can easily, like your friend said over there, transmit it much faster, or you can store it on your storage device much easier. Right, so we briefly touch on why do you want to perform image compression. The next thing is that, why is it possible to perform compression? Why is it possible for image? Why is it possible to perform compression? Okay, so the reason why it is possible to perform image compression is because in images there exist two kinds of redundancy. Okay, redundancy, what we call data redundancy. So the kind of redundancy that exists in image, one of them is known as a spatial redundancy. The other is known as a psychovisual redundancy. Because an image contains this kind of these two types of redundancy, that's why we are able to perform compression. Right, so next, what is spatial redundancy? Right, a spatial redundancy, as the name suggests, spatial, what is spatial? Spatial means space, okay, space. So spatial redundancy is the kind of redundant information that exists in an image, okay? Right, what you can think about it is that for most natural images that you have, if you look at a small image region, its pixel value tends to be very similar or very different to each other. If you look at the image, for example, natural image, if you look at my hand, right, if you zoom in a small region here, do you feel that this pixel value tends to be very similar or very different? Tends to be very similar. Huh? So for most natural images, if you look at a small image neighborhood, its pixel value tends to be very similar. When this pixel value tends to be very similar, we say that there exists a spatial redundancy. There's some redundant information there. So why is it redundant information? Okay, the reason why the information is redundant is if you look at a small image neighborhood, if the current value, pixel value, is very similar to the pixel before it or the pixel on top of it, then you have lots of repetition, right? You have lots of redundant information there, right? Because instead of representing this current pixel value, I could have easily used the pixel value before it to represent it. So because of that, this kind of redundancy, therefore, is known as spatial redundancy, right? So spatial redundancy sometimes is also known as the intra-frame, okay, because it's just within one image. Right, it's a redundancy. It also represents the statistical correlation, okay, between pixels within a small image neighborhood. So what's the meaning of this word correlation? Correlation, actually, you can think of it mathematically. If you have learned, if you are from school or EE, you have learned those signal correlation, right? But correlation, if you are not from school or EE, correlation is just like how similar, okay, the pixel values are, how related they are. So to explain this concept, if you want to look at the spatial redundancy, it's very easy. Just think about this particular image here. This image, you have two coordinate values, x and y. And then this particular image here, the pixel value, because it's gray image, so the pixel value is just like the intensity. You can imagine that right along this axis and this axis, this is x coordinate, y coordinate, and this intensity is like the mountains and valleys, right? You can kind of imagine the intensity at each of the pixel is the mountains and the valleys, right? With the xy coordinate here. So if you use your knife to cut through one row, one typical row, okay, so this may be the intensity along, for example, one of the row here, right? If you use a knife to cut through it vertically along one of the column, right, this may be the intensity, how it looks like here. So the idea of this spatial redundancy is simply, if you look at a small image neighborhood close enough, if you look at a region close enough, their pixel values tend to be very similar. Because their values are very similar, that means there are some redundant extra information that exists there. So when we perform image compression, this is one property we use to exploit to perform the compression. Right, okay, so the next reason why it's possible to perform compression is because in many images, right, okay, there exists this thing called psychovisual redundancy. This psychovisual redundancy also has to do with how our human visual system perceive an image. Right, so under this psychovisual redundancy, there's a few obvious ones. One is called texture masking. So as the name suggests, texture masking means that texture actually can mask the object. So just imagine if I'm wearing a shirt with one color, right? During the lunch, if I'm very sloppy when I eat the noodle, if there's a spot here, all of you can spot it readily. Yes? Yeah, but as opposed to that, if I'm wearing a shirt with a stripe like this, Okay, if there's a spot here, most of you are not able to pick up the spot so quickly. Why is it so? It's because for human visual system, we are more sensitive to those distortion in the smooth region. Or in other words, texture such as a stripe like my shirt here, they are able to mask, okay, some of the signal distortion or some of the spots and so on. Right, so this is the intrinsic natures of this human visual system. The next one is called frequency masking. For frequency masking, what it means is that our eyes are more sensitive to low frequency component than high frequency component. Right, any one of you have learned 1D signal before? All of you have studied frequency in your physics, right? In JC or poly or secondary schools, right? So you know what is a frequency, right? What is frequency? Frequency is a rate of change, yeah? So for example, if you look at 1D signal, if things change slowly, you have low frequency. If things change very quickly, you have high frequency. So likewise for an image, the idea is similar. If you look at small image region, okay, if you look at a small image region like this, if you look at, for example, either the shirt here or this particular face value here, if you look at small region, you can see its pixel value or the mountain and valley, it changes very slowly. Okay, if it changes very slowly, we say, okay, image near this region, for example, these smooth regions here, has very low frequency. Okay, this is as opposed to, for example, image near this region, near the tree region, where you have the foliage and the leaf. The pixel value change very quickly. If you change very quickly, that means you have high frequency region here. So this particular point, frequency masking, means that our eyes are more sensitive to changes in low frequency component than high frequency component. So what it means is that, right, if you compress an image and if you try to reconstruct an image of low frequency region here, if there's any distortion, for example, a spot, you can spot this thing very readily. As opposed to, right, if you try to reconstruct an image and if there's some distortion near this texture region or this high frequency region, your eyes are not so sensitive. So you can see number 1 and 2, actually they are closely related to each other, this frequency and the texture masking. The last one is color masking. Color masking has to do with how our human visual system perceives a color image. You know that, I think for many of you, when you study biology, you know that we have different kind of cells in our eye, right? One is a cone, the other is a rod, right? So one is a cone, the other is rod, right? So one of the cells is sensitive to the brightness, okay, what we know as a luminance component. The others are sensitive to color, okay, what we know as a prominence component. So in this particular case here, essentially what it means is that our eyes are more sensitive to brightness than color. Okay, our eyes are more sensitive to brightness than the color component. So when we combine for JPEG compression, essentially it's trying to exploit these two properties to perform the compression. Right, okay, I think for the rest I'll continue tomorrow. Right.